now we're going to talk a bit about the Kurdish periphery. And Wladimir, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, but you have to disabuse me from the beginning of this idea of a periphery. It seems to me that everything we're looking at suggests that the Kurdish issue is coming very much into the center. Off to you.
Thanks. Yeah, so we can discuss periphery or center. So why the Kurds are becoming more in the central stage in the discussions in the fight against ISIS. First of all, on the left, you have the newly established Syrian Democratic Force, which is dominated by the YPG, which is somehow affiliated to the PKK, as Dihad mentioned. They have around 40,000 fighters, and also some Christian militias are fighting with them, and a number of Syrian Arabs that are allied to them. And together they form the Syrian Democratic Force, which could play a big role in future operations against ISIS in Raqqah, which is a central goal of the US. And then on the right side, you have the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, which are around 120,000 active Peshmerga forces, and then you have around 60,000 reserve forces. And they are also surrounding Mosul, and they have the potential, if combined with Iraqi armed forces, they could sandwich ISIS in Mosul in the near future or in a long-term future. So there's three possible operations for the Kurds in northern Syria. They talk about three operations. The first operation is on the left side. Operation 1 is around the Jarablus-Azaz Strip. What they want is to connect the Kurdish territories from Kobani all the way to Afrin. But the problem is that Turkey is heavily against this, and if they do this, Turkey is going to bomb them with tanks, which already happened. Another operation which they are more focusing on now is towards Raqqah. They have an alliance with a small FSA group. It's called Jamestown Raqqah. Nick also knows a lot about this group, and it consists mostly of Arabs from the Raqqah and from Deir ez-Zor area. This is Operation 2, which is possible that they will move towards Raqqah. A lot of people say that's not possible, but in my opinion, it's possible that they at least move towards Raqqah. And then the third operation is all the way to the right. That's already happening now, is that they're moving towards Shaddadi. And the main goal of this operation is basically to cut off the alternative road between Raqqah and Mosul, which was established recently. Because after the Kurds captured Shingal, they lost the Highway 47. And now ISIS has a road between Raqqah, Shaddadi, Bash, all the way towards Mosul. And if the Kurds, they manage to do this, they're going to cut off this road also. So there are three possible operations, which of Jarablus is the most difficult one because it's opposed by Turkey, which enables ISIS to continue to control this border area. So as I said, what you could already see, this possible operation of the YPG leads to a lot of tensions with Turkey because they don't want to have a Kurdish viable entity on their borders. And also one out of the other issues is a lot of YPG fighters, they're actually from Turkey. A lot of people always think they are a Syrian Kurdish force, but the YPG and the PKK, it's a transnational Kurdish movement, which is a pan-Kurdish movement, and they have Kurds from everywhere. And a lot of Kurds from Turkey, they are now fighting in Syria against ISIS, and Turkey is afraid that in the future these fighters can go back to Turkey and cause trouble there, and they will have all this experience of the Syrian civil war. Another new factor is, of course, Russia, which also Nihat mentioned, is that Russia has an interest to attack Turkish-supported rebels around Azaz, close to in northern Aleppo. And now there's already clashes between Islamist and FSA groups with YPG allied forces in northern Aleppo. And it's possibly that Russia is poised to benefit from these tensions between Turkey and the Kurds in the Aleppo area. And they will use this, possibly they could try to induce the YPG to work with them to cut off the moderate rebel supply lines from northern Aleppo towards the central Aleppo. And this will create like huge problems between the Syrian rebels and the Kurds. This is a map showing northern Aleppo. In the middle, you see, in the middle, like on the left side, is the YPG controlled area. Then on the right side, there's some FSA rebels allied to the YPG. And in this sort of red circle in the middle, there have been clashes between YPG allied rebels and FSA rebels that are supported by Turkey. And if you go more up, you see that the Russians are now even carrying out border close airstrikes close to the border, close to Bab al-Salama, and they're targeting trucks coming in. And they're targeting logistical lines, and this creates like problems because the rebels are afraid that YPG could use this to advance against their positions. I've been to Jarablus, close to Jarablus. So you see here on the hill there's a Turkish observation balloon, and there's also a Turkish tank which is hidden. And from that position they strike YPG or FSA positions if they cross the bridge into Jarablus. And here is some examples of Turkish tank shells that hit YPG position. And the fighter you see in the picture, he's also a Kurd from Turkey. So it shows that there's a very big number of Kurdish fighters from Turkey fighting in Syria now. So basically it's around, oh, it doesn't go. I think it's a bit heavy, the PowerPoint. Basically, the problem is here around Jarablus. So where you see the Turkish tank sign, there's the problem, and Turkey prevents them from crossing the border into Jarablus. And as a result, ISIS keeps controlling this border. Then we're going to talk about Raqqah. In Raqqah, there's a small alliance of Arab rebels working with the Kurds. US, for some reason, have branded them the Syrian Arab Coalition. That is completely new. So there are Syrian Arabs both close to Raqqah working with the Kurds, but also in the Hasaka province. But there's still a problem, and that is that the US doesn't trust the FSA group led by rebels from Raqqah. I'm not sure what's the reason for this problem, that the US doesn't trust the Syrian Arabs that work with the YPG. But there's a good reason also for the FSA to distrust the US, because last time when their leader went to Turkey to meet with the Americans, after that he was kidnapped by a mafia that tried to sell him to ISIS, but he managed to escape. So now this rebel leader says he will not have any meetings with the US unless it's inside Syria, and he's not willing to travel to Turkey because he considers it unsafe. And also Turkey really hates this group now because they work with the Kurds and they will do everything to undermine them. And that creates, again, a problem, because if there's no cooperation between these FSA groups, Turkey, the Kurds and the US, it's going to be more difficult to defeat ISIS in Raqqah. Because that's one of the main reasons why ISIS is so strong in the recent years, because they are benefiting from all the different policies of all the different groups which are all in conflict with each other. And also another point I want to make is that a lot of Western articles recently, New York Times, they claim that the Kurds have no interest in Arab areas. But the Kurds, the YPG, the PKK and their allies, they have a huge interest in taking the fight towards Raqqah because they know that their area will never be safe. And also now, especially with Turkey preventing them from taking Jarablus, they have more interest to show that they are serious in the fight against ISIS. And that's why they're doing more operations now in Hasaka, but also they will do this in Raqqah. This is the rebel commander who was captured by mafia which had ties with ISIS. And the rebel commander showed me this picture. So this is one of the reasons why this small FSA group of around 1,000 fighters is very distrustful of the US and Turkey, because they don't consider it a safe area anymore. Now I'm going to talk more about the second operation territory, which is Hasaka. What's very interesting in Hasaka is that the YPG is recruiting a lot of Arabs in this area. And they're quite successful in recruiting, I'm not sure how many, but the YPG says around 30% of their forces in this area is now Arab. It's not Kurdish, but Arab. And what I've seen from some of the operations in the Hasaka province is that they actually welcome YPG offensives. And that also, because of this, that the regime was not able to protect the Arabs in Hasaka from ISIS in June last summer, when ISIS attacked the Hasaka city. The local Arabs also started to move more towards the YPG, although it's a Kurdish force. And I know there has been allegations of human rights violations and forced displacement around especially some areas in northern Syria, but close to Hasaka city it seems to be quite different. And also it shows that a lot of people are thinking of working with the regime to fight ISIS, but so far the regime has not shown a lot of resilience, for instance in Hasaka or Palmyra, that they can fight ISIS. They are better in fighting moderate rebel forces. So this, you can see here on the right, you see Hasaka city, and the YPG are moving towards Shaddadi. And if they are able to capture this, it could cut the alternative road between Mosul and Raqqah. And this is also the area you see on the left. In the last 6 months, they have captured all these areas from ISIS. So I have heard a lot of this talk that ISIS is still strong, but ISIS is losing a lot of areas on the ground. These are Arab civilians that welcome Arab YPG fighters in the Hasaka province. And here are Arab fighters with the YPG. So that's often a forgotten element, that there are now a lot of Arabs also inside YPG. This is a YPG fighter that is coordinating with the US. What the US did is that they give them Samsung tablets, and on the tablets you can see the positions, and that's how they coordinate airstrikes against ISIS. And so far it seems that in coordination with local forces, it has been quite effective in the last 6 months to capture large areas from ISIS. Now I'm going to talk about the Iraqi Kurds, which is a completely different subject. Currently, the Kurds control about 59% of the territory that they want to control, what they consider Kurdish, and there's 5% left. They could possibly work further towards Kirkuk, Hawija, the outskirts of Sinjar and Tal Afar, and towards Mosul. But this also needs more cooperation between the Sunni Arabs and the Peshmerga and the Iraqi army, because if they want to clean completely Kirkuk from ISIS or Mosul, they need to have some form of coordination with the Iraqi Arabs and the Iraqi army. But recently there have been clashes even between Shia militias and Peshmerga forces, and this is a huge problem. So here are outlined 3 possible operations. The first operation is more close to the Syrian border, is that they capture Al-Bash and Tal Afar. But the problem again is that Tal Afar is not a Kurdish city, it's a mixed Shia Sunni Turkmen city. So it needs some form of participation of Sunni Arab forces or Shia Turkmen forces, but it doesn't exist at that point. Then on the right side you have Operation 2, which is possible, is that they cut, if the Iraqi Shia militias and the Iraqi army move up from Beji towards Shirgat, they can cut ISIS completely off from the other areas in Hawija and Kirkuk. And then if they do a joint operation with the Peshmerga, they can destroy completely ISIS in the Kirkuk province. And from that, the most important operation is also, of course, Mosul, but that really also depends on future operations in Kirkuk. It also depends on the operation in Tal Afar, and if the Ramadi operation, which is going on now, is successful. But there is possibilities, as you can see, to defeat ISIS on the ground. But the problem every time is the lack of Sunni Arab forces. And this creates a huge problem for the future, because most of the forces that now fight ISIS are only the Kurds and the Shia militias, and a little bit role, of course, the Iraqi army. I don't think I have a lot of time for this, so I skip it. This is one of the vehicles that ISIS uses to carry out operations against Peshmerga forces. But now, because the Peshmerga receive coalition air support and Milan rockets from the German army, they are not able to use this. And it is one of the main assets of ISIS are these VIBs. But now they are not able to use it because of the airstrikes. This is more clearly to show how they can cut off Kirkuk. You see the red line. If the Iraqi army moves up and the Peshmerga moves from the right side, then they can completely sandwich ISIS in Kirkuk. But the problem still is that the difference between the Shia militias and the Kurds could hamper, after ISIS, potential conflict again. But we will have to see that. Also, in Sinjar, which was recently captured, it only took 2 days. This was the first day before the operation. And then after 2 days, they captured Sinjar completely. It showed that airstrikes work and it defeats ISIS on the ground. But in my opinion is that ISIS, because of the losses on the ground, they're moving more towards operations in Europe. And after the Kurds captured Sinjar, immediately was the Paris attack. So I don't think this is a coincidence. And that also shows that the Western media, somehow ISIS knows how to manipulate the Western media, because there was a lot of journalists in Sinjar when it happened, but after that there was not so much attention. So there's more attention for if ISIS carries out the attack or if they win an area, but if ISIS lose an area, for instance in the future, if they will lose Ramadi, I'm sure we'll almost see no media coverage of that. And that's a problem because it helps ISIS to keep up this image that they are strong. Well, actually, they are very weak on the ground, and they're fleeing Sinjar. In 2 days, they took it and they fled. So I don't think ISIS is so strong anymore on the ground, at least in Iraq and Syria, as people think it is. But the problem is that they're going to move more towards operations, mass casualty attacks in Europe to deflect attention to this. So this is the alternative road. Well, I already talked somehow on the Mosul operation. This could be the future Mosul operation, but as I said, the problem is the Sunni Arab forces that are being trained now actually by Turkey. And this again is creating a conflict between Turkey, or tensions between Turkey and Baghdad. So Turkey is now actively training Sunni Arab police force close to Mosul in Bashik. If you look up, the Bashik is there on the right. They're training there now, but Baghdad is not happy with this because Turkey didn't get, according to the Baghdad government, no permission from Baghdad to operate there. So the problem in the future will be who's going to be the Sunni Arab actor that's going to control Mosul, because it's not possible to have a Shia militia there, Iraqi army there, because then in the future we have another ISIS generation 2. And in Raqqah, at least, there are some Syrian FSA rebels that work with the Kurds, so they could play a role in Raqqah. But in Mosul, we don't have a Sunni Arab alternative to ISIS at this point, and that's a huge problem. And at least in Syria, there is a sort of a form of a Sunni Arab alternative presented in the Free Syrian Army, but you don't have this in Iraq. So there's a need for a bigger Sunni Arab component. Turkey-Kurdish tensions could hinder future anti-IS operations. And a counter-narrative to defeating ISIS is to defeat them on the ground and to show that they are losing. And in order to present their image that they're still expanding and holding, they will do more attacks in the West. And also the Russian influence could complicate Kurdish-US relations. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's very difficult to define what Russian failure is first of all. Probably the priority for the Russians is to secure Assad's Alawite heartland. So if they are managed at least to, I think the Russian goal is to keep Assad strong enough in those areas that it doesn't collapse. Because in my opinion, the Russian operation was in response to the victories of the Saudi, Qatari, Turkish-supported alliance of Jaish al-Fatah. Which also includes Al-Qaeda, unfortunately. So I think if the Russians just can keep up and keep them to protect Latakia and to at least get the rebels out of Aleppo and prevent them from advancing, it's already a sort of a small victory. But I think for the Kurds, they cannot benefit so much from the Russians, because the priority for the Russians is only to fight against rebel groups that fight Assad, and the priority is not ISIS. And the biggest threat to Kurds in northern Syria is ISIS and not the moderate rebel groups. So in the end, I think the Kurds will continue to work with the US-led coalition against ISIS in Hasaka and Raqqah, but the problem is all the time the border strip controlled by ISIS between Jarablus and Azaz. What's Turkey going to do with this? What's Russia going to do this? I think nothing. What's the US going to do? Is there going to be a sort of agreement between the US and Turkey to at least clean that area from ISIS? I don't think so. So that's very difficult to see what's going to happen with that border strip. Thank you.
Let's take some questions from out here. Hands, any place? Front, right here in front. You got it? Great. Yes.
I was wondering if Wladimir could spend some time talking about tensions within the various Kurdish organizations and movements that might prove an obstacle to fighting ISIS.
There's too many to mention. First of all, in Sinjar, there's huge competition between the KDP and the PKK. In Sinjar, the PKK entered this area since ISIS attacked it in August 2014. They managed to enter. And now after Sinjar is liberated, there's both forces of the PKK there and there's Peshmerga forces. And at some point, at this time, it's not a battle yet, but there's a lot of people in the PKK are quite worried that it could escalate and result into fights between Peshmerga and PKK forces in Sinjar, which is still in Iraq. So that could possibly hurt the fight against ISIS, and ISIS also knows this because they described this in Dabiq, the last magazine of ISIS, the glossy magazine Dabiq. They also mentioned that there's a lot of internal problems in the Iraqi Kurdistan, for instance, over the presidency issue. There's disagreements if Barzani should stay or not. And recently, Goran, which was one of the partners in the government, was kicked out from the government by the KDP. And at the same time, there's not so much good cooperation between the Iraqi Kurdish parties. But I think at this point it doesn't hurt so much the fight against ISIS because the Peshmerga forces are somehow not so much influenced by these debates because the Peshmerga forces areas are very clearly delineated. Like it's very clear which areas are PUK Peshmerga and which areas are KDP Peshmerga because they already fought a civil war for this. So I don't think it's going to hurt so much the fight against ISIS from the Iraqi Kurds, apart from the risk of tensions between the PKK and Peshmerga and Sinjar. That could be a possible problem because there needs to be some form of stability if there's going to be any future operations for all those areas below Sinjar, like Tel Afar and Ba'ash. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, can I follow that up from the other side? I mean, the classic narrative, the classic discussion is the independent Kurdish state. When you're traveling around with YPG or the Peshmerga, what's the narrative? What are they talking about? How do they think about the question that has seemed to dominate all of our discussion of Kurdistan for almost ever?
First of all, there's a huge difference between Peshmerga and YPG. The Peshmerga narrative is very Kurdish nationalist, saying, okay, we control these borders, and if Baghdad wants or not, these borders are now Kurdistan, and you're not going to get rid of us here. This is Kurdistan, and especially President Barzani, he wants to have a future referendum about Kurdish independence, and he's looking for support from this for Gulf states, Arab Gulf states, and also he wants to get support for this from Turkey, but I'm not sure if that's possible. And then the Syrian Kurds are very different because the YPG have this sort of rhetoric of being non-Kurdish, a non-Kurdish force, and they established a Syrian Democratic Force. So while in the beginning they were talking about self-administrations in free local areas in Syria, now they're even talking about a federal democratic Syria for all of Syria. So I think this is a sort of strategy from the YPG and the PKK because of these Vienna talks and the future talks about the transition. So ourselves into better negotiations position on the table for future discussions. So I think this ethnic Kurdistan in Syria, that doesn't exist because they have Christians, they have Arabs, it's very different. But the Iraqi Kurds, they say we are Kurdish and that's it. This is Kurdistan and we're not going to give those areas away to Baghdad. That's over. Thanks.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to ask about the Kurdish regions and stability with the influx of refugees into those areas. That poses a problem with the loops, the ability of them to take care of their own people and provide a force view. And also wanted to ask about Russia and any positive economic benefit from their position in Syria. The oil prices, I'm sure, have been more stable for them as a result of their incursion. And also, do they come back and spend money on their military as a result of growing this kind of campaign?
Let's start with the Kurds. Vladi, you want to pick that up? Maybe Nick?
Well, there's a huge influx. I think it's now 1.5 million or even more IDPs and refugees in the Kurdistan region. They already have no budget from Baghdad because Baghdad blocks the budget because they're exporting oil by themselves. They already have a problem with lack of payments, like they cannot pay the Peshmerga salaries. So in the future, it could be a problem for the Kurdish economy because there's a lot of internal problems now because of the economy take a huge hit. And if, for instance, if they start the Mosul operation, it's going to be another, I'm not sure how many, maybe 1 million or a lot of people are going to flee Mosul. And those Sunni Arabs, they never go towards Baghdad. They most of the time goes towards Kurdish-controlled areas. So then there's another problem. And then a huge problem is that the international NGOs working in the area, they're saying they don't have a budget anymore. I'm not sure if they just want to have more budget or if it's really related to having budgetary concerns. But it seems that if there's no agreement or some sort of a solution for a financial, for a budget for the KRG, they're going to have more problems with the new refugees that are going to come, the new IDPs that are going to be created by the conflict around Mosul especially. So that's going to create a huge problem. But I think they can still sustain their military campaign with the airstrikes, but they're going to have more and more difficulties economically speaking and internally speaking, also with internally the stability, protests and this kind of civil unrest. It's a high possibility it's going to increase more. But I don't think it's going to be to the certain extent that they cannot sustain the war against ISIS anymore. Thanks.
Nick, something to add?
So I would say from the rebel perspective, the EPG is a nefarious, a lot of the rebel discourses that the EPG is a nefarious actor. The terminology they use is a militia, commonly on par with what the IRGC has mobilized in Hezbollah. They highlight these recent clashes that Wladimir pointed out north and east of Aleppo as an example of the EPG being a cause of massacres and to be a cause of refugee flows and to be a negative actor. And so we already see, as I mentioned earlier, in the context of this Vienna process, a glimpse of the sort of the war after the war, focused on that area that Wladimir pointed out, the Manbij pocket that's referred to around town here, and the question of, starkly the question of like what is the counter-ISIS force? My impression of the idea that's put forth by Erdogan and by some of the pro-opposition states is that the proper counter-ISIS force is in fact those coalitions of predominantly Islamist rebels inside Aleppo and north of it that sort of stand the line and fire when fired upon. My impression is that the U.S. perspective is that you can have some of that, but the Syrian Democratic Forces coalition that Vladimir's talked about is in fact moving in the right direction, and that we need to amplify its efforts to promote Arab recruitment and amplify its efforts to try to build out alternative models for a post-conflict end state, as Wladimir pointed out, such as federalism.